it is a movie that many of you, or I would wager to say most of you, have seen if you're on this stream. But if you haven't, just a classic reminder: I'll be spoiling the movie because obviously I want to make a review of the entirety of the art form from the beginning to the end. So if you haven't seen it and want to see it for yourself, and or you haven't seen it but don't want to know the ending before seeing it yourself, just maybe skip this one. But it's going to be interesting, and I'm of course open to any kind of ideas from you guys when it comes to what you like, what you didn't like, or as we move along, like what do you think about what I think, essentially. But for those of you who haven't seen it but remain on the stream, we are talking, of course, about the 2019 American psychological thriller. It was directed and produced by Todd Phillips, who is best known for his movies such as Starsky and Hutch, or the Hangover film series. The Hangover in Vegas, Bangkok, Part 2, all these movies, which was quite interesting for me when I realized like who this guy was, because this is a little bit of a shift from what I would call his usual cinema. But it was written and produced by him as well as Scott Silver. It was of course nominated for Best Picture, Best Director, Best Adapted Screenplay, and also Best Actor in the 93rd Academy Awards, I believe. Oscars, essentially, when it came out in 2020. It came out in 2019, but the Oscars of 2020, that is. What I found interesting upon further research is that these guys, Todd Phillips and Scott Silver, while making the movies, were heavily inspired by Scorsese's 1970s characters in his 1970s movies, such as Taxi Driver or The King of Comedy. Movies that are prolific when it comes to torn characters and characters that are suffering. And as I talked about the nominations, I might as well tell you what it did win was Best Actor for Joaquin Phoenix, who interestingly was the second actor to win the Oscar, as you may well know, for portraying the Joker, that is. Because Heath Ledger won it in 2009 for his portrayal of the Joker in The Dark Knight? Yeah, The Dark Knight, which, became prolific and pretty much everybody knows at this point. What we will talk about as well, by the way, as we move, beyond analysis and some conclusions, is how this film became controversial, especially in the United States, due to concerns about glorifying and glamorizing violence in many forms, and its portrayal of mental illness leading inevitably to some kind of release in the form of violence. We will talk about the arguments of the critics of the movie, such as Richard Lawson from Vanity Fair, and many others for their ideas and criticisms of the movies in that sense as well, because I feel it's important to note. But before we get into that, we will talk about the movie and explore the movie in itself, in a standing art form, whether it holds up or doesn't. Now, before continuing, I wanted to let you know that I am not a big fan of any kind of superhero movies or superhero-inspired movies. I know we had a discussion about this with Cotier, but I just very often I find it very two-dimensional, and I just don't feel like the depth is there, for me to keep watching, for me to actually remember the movie. When it comes to dialogues and character development, or the story, the twist, the stakes and everything, it just feels kind of a little, surface level for me, at least. Very often I feel like the stories are just regurgitated of a villain threatening the world and a superhero of some kind saving it. and you know, the originality is very much tied, like in my opinion, rather exclusively to what kind of super ability that superhero has. I'm pleased to inform you that, however, that this movie is far, far from it. And I feel like the very beginning already revealed the movie for being a little bit more than that, at least for me. Because there was the scene, I don't know if you remember, if you've seen it, there was the scene of Anthony... Sorry, what was the name of the main character again? What was the name of Joker? And Arthur Fleck. I want to say Anthony. Arthur Fleck, sorry. Of Arthur Fleck having makeup of a clown on his face and looking at himself in the mirror and making like weird faces and like playing with his face a little bit in a way portrayed brilliantly by Joaquin Phoenix that we will talk about as well throughout the review. In a way that really underscored the kind of derangement or some kind of like mental like disorder almost of this character, and that's just something that's a like good, subtle, somewhat subtle at least, directing, but more importantly, it's Joaquin Phoenix who really sold this kind of intro, because I think having it played by anybody else, and I'm not including this in with like Heath Ledger, who's of course a legend as well, having it played by like a regular, I would say, or an actor of like a regular ability, who just wouldn't sell it. You know, Joaquin Phoenix was absolutely phenomenal in this movie, and he showed it in the intro itself. There were a couple problems with the movie I had. They aren't huge. Mostly they are connected to realism and like how I feel that this, you know, if this would happen in like real life. Because the thing is with the movie, even though it is somewhat connected to a superhero franchise, it's still like a movie focused on realism and somewhat like, and it's set in a realistic world. You know, there are no like super abilities or sci-fi science that like Batman has, for example, right? There's none of that here. And so when something happens that is somewhat like strange, even like a little bit, you know, your mind focuses on it just like in any other regular movie. There is a scene very early on with Arthur Fleck. You can see there on the right, is making his money as like a street clown, advertising some kind of business or another. And there's just some youths that, you know, steal his sign. You can see it over there, the sign that he has, and you know, they steal it and run away with it, and he chases them. And I kind of like, you know, that's still fine. That's still within the realms of like possibility. But then like he runs at them, and they're in an alley that has no like dead end or anything. It just continues straight on, and the youths decide to like hide behind a corner, and then they smash the sign, you know, into him as he runs past, making him fall to the floor. And then they basically just run to him and start kicking him while he's on the floor, which like I looked at, and like maybe it's just me, maybe it's that I'm not like living in a particularly violent city or anything like that, but I feel like that kind of violence, like I kind of understand, you know, some despicable people maybe like hitting him with a sign or something like that, but like kicking him on the ground as he's lying down, that is a level of cruelty that it does serve a purpose in the movie, so it's not like completely gratuitous, but it feels like it's a little bit of a stretch when it comes to like, would that really happen? You know, like am I following the story here? Is this maybe a little bit too outstretched? But my doubts were very quickly completely gone, and I forgot, and I completely stopped thinking about it when this kind of kicking on the ground scene ended with like a wide shot of the alley and him lying on the ground. And as you can see on the picture there, he has a little bouquet on his or like a little flower or whatever, a clown flower on his chest. And as there's the wide shot and the movie name that you can see in the top right of the screen right now comes up, a little stream of water pours from the flower, which is, you know, this classic super old joke that clowns make when you like look into it. When you look into the flower, the flower squirts out water into your face, and that's you know, that's the funny. That's the classic, the oldest joke in the book. You look into the flower, the flower squirts out water. In this case, the water sort of like pours out as he's lying down, and like the symbolism of this scene like immediately hit me when I saw it. And like a movie that's because there wasn't any detail or anything. It was a wide shot, right? But you could, if you focus on it, you see it, and it's kind of like the movie communicating to you that this is like a dark kind of comedy, you know, because it takes this classic comedy sign that everybody knows, but it also like the it's a pour rather than a spray, but it's still connected to this comedic sign. So you can see, you know, the darkness of like the comedy that is this film, and like the stretch between like what's funny and what's not is very much part of the main themes. But as you could have noticed in the chat, my good friend Cotier is trying to make sure that I'm not without any drink. So I'll just grab a little cider, as Cotier redeemed the Drinks on Me channel reward. There are new and custom channel rewards that you can check out. Not for you, Cotier, you've already seen them all, obviously. But yeah, that's one of the things that you can make me do, make me grab a drink. So bear with me for a little bit, folks. All right, I'm back. Cheers. All right. So I said how the little flower pouring a little bit as he lies down on the ground sort of reveals one of the themes, which is like the bridge between like comedy and tragedy, but also what really drives home the atmosphere and the general vibe of the movie, which of course is dark and has to be dark for reasons that we will talk about later as well. What the movie achieves very well is portraying and showing this atmosphere and the inner feelings of the character through dark music, like undertones, whatever is happening, and you know, the intensification of that kind of monolithic music when there's anger building up inside him, so you can kind of feel when the anger is building up inside Joker, inside Anthony Fleck, when he's, for example, being yelled at by the boss because the boss doesn't believe his story that some youths attacked him and stole the sign. So therefore he's telling him that essentially the cost of the sign will be taken from his salary unless he returns it. And you know, in like scenes like that, you can hear and feel kind of the music going under everything that you watch, kind of going up, intensifying a little bit, and there's a little bit of like this uncomfortable kind of violin sound when, you know, this anger kind of grows into insanity. And stuff like that. But now we are at the social worker, which were, of course, interesting scenes as well, because it also underscored how, like, even like professional help couldn't help him. Part of that was, of course, to show that he's being shunned in a way, but also that there's kind of like no helping him, or there's no available help, effective help, even from like the professionals. In this case, which was, I think, the first time we see him with the social worker, he says, "I just don't want to feel so bad anymore," which, much like everything that he says at the social worker, which is like a little bit of a deep dive into his soul, into his psyche, could be interpreted in lots of ways. I have to like give kudos to the writers. They have been writing this movie for like 3 years, and they have been inspired by Scorsese, whatever, to a great degree. So obviously the writing is very much on par. And when he says stuff like that, it's often you can still interpret it as like, you know, he says, I just don't want to feel bad, so bad anymore, as in he just doesn't want to feel bad. But like the way it's put and everything, it kind of, for me at least, shows his attempt to just simplify what are very complex issues within him, or maybe the systems, like the institution necessity for simplifying something like that. Like, rather than looking at like what he struggles with, his uncontrollable laughter, his desperate situation at home, low socioeconomic standard, feeling of unfulfillment and everything like that, rather than focusing on those things, they focus on, I just don't want to feel bad anymore. You know, here are some medications so you don't feel bad anymore. And maybe I'm just reading too much into it, but like the way it's put and the way like everything is shot, of like him kind of looking down like that with this like dark and gloomy visuals along with the undertones, it kind of feels like there's more to it than that. You know, there's complex issues that are kind of the dialogue is simple, but the issues deep within, you know, there's something more, there's something behind the curtain. My internet connection is bad. No, don't worry about it. As long as you're here, as long as you're hearing me, and the stream isn't buffering too much, then yeah, maybe just try refreshing the stream or something like that, or go closer to your router if you can. But yes, so moving away from the social worker, I just have to say again, Joaquin Phoenix, he did win Best Actor for this movie, and very deservedly so. Like, just looking at his eyes in pretty much any scene, like I thought, and I had this thought while watching the movie, that's why I wrote it down here, he could act out this entire movie with just his eyes, which was, you know, it was amazing. It's also very attractive as a man. Sure. Like, yeah, I guess he is. I didn't really focus on that. But yeah, I suppose so. What I found interesting about his character as well is, I already touched on that, but the uncontrollable laughter. Because in this movie, and I don't know, because I'm not like a huge fan of superhero movies, as I said, it's presented as like a mental condition, sort of, you know, you would compare it to Tourette's, for example, and like the more well-known conditions, mental conditions. As in, like, usually when he feels stressed or like under duress or anything like that, he starts laughing. And he, you know, can't stop, really. It's uncontrollable. He even has this little card that he shows people when he has this like laughing episodes in like the bus, for example. He shows people, you know, I have this condition, I can't stop laughing. I'm sorry. But like, even though it's presented as a mental condition, it still has like a very tangible symbolism in the movie, which, you know, could be seen as both like some kind of maniacal laughter in the face of despair, and at the same time like this unfair, unjust, chaotic world that's driving a man into like insanity, because laughing, like maniacal laughter, is a very universally accepted and understood symbol of like being unhinged, being like a little off. You know, maniacal laughter, whether it be like crazy villains, which is like the classic archetype. a classic behavior trait of villains. It is this maniacal laughter, and like giving this maniacal laughter some sort of like focus in this movie. It elevates this very classic trope to a level of like a symbol that's like universally now like accepted as a symbol of his despair, rather than like a cliched way of portraying a villain, because the way it's portrayed in the movie, it really feels like this kind of laughter is very much like something that once we witness, we know his despair and his stress and nervousness of what's going on around him is kind of masked by that laughter. So that is very interesting. Gautier, you make me drink on every single one of my streams. Clara Lauritsen, if you want to, it seems that you were trying to write a very, very long message. Maybe try like putting it in 2 messages. The reason why we have that is to like protect from people just spamming our chat in with like huge paragraphs. Maybe write a message once and then a second time. Yes, I do, more than once, if at all possible. Yes, you, my friend, like to see people drink. I'll say that. Moving on from the character traits and behavioral traits more towards the filmography itself, the visuals, the way everything is shot. It's quite amazing. Because if you focus on the movie, like when it comes to like color, for example, everything is very dark and gloomy. Colors aren't very saturated and everything like that. Laughter is a frequent kind of so-called deflection. See Gestalt therapy. Yeah. I don't like to drink alone. That is completely understandable. It's like drinking with the lads across the pond. Laughter is a frequent kind of so-called deflection, and I'll have to research that a bit more. But I think I read more about that. But talking about like psychological studies or psychology in general, what I found very interesting about this filmography, and excuse me while I look up, or I actually have the link here. When I talked about dark and gloomy visuals, it's not only like shown like everything is dark and gloomy, like look at how dark everything is. It's also and I'm not, and again, like I can't know if that was on purpose, but it feels like it's done for purpose. When it comes to color, people suffering from depression or like altered mental states see color and like not necessarily see color, but visualize color differently in shades. I believe, yeah, there is a study. It was done by. There's a study in biological psychiatry by Dr. Emmanuel Bubble, and essentially what they did, they evaluated 40 patients suffering from depression, 20 of whom were taking antidepressant medication and 20 who were not. Then there were 40 healthy patients that were also studied as a control, and they found a significant decrease in the retinal sensitivity of depressed patients, even patients taking medication. And the more severely depressed a patient, the lower the retinal response. And what that essentially means is that when you're depressed or like suffering from like from a kind of long-term depression, your sensitivity to like shades and how you view colors, in a sense of how strong and vibrant these colors are, you just don't see that. You don't see how vibrant those colors are. Everything seems just darker and gloomier, much like this movie. So that's the reason why we feel what we feel, or part of the reason why we feel what we feel while we watch the movie. But it's also a very good device to kind of portray the feeling of the character of Joker, or Arthur Fleck, through the visuals of the actual cinematography. Deflection is turning away emotional trigger in order to prevent full recognition of associated material. Example giving painful memories. Oh, you mean like the actual deflection, like that? Yes, I understand that. I don't believe that that's the way it was used in this movie. Like maybe it could have. Like you could argue that Joker, like maybe through his laughter, rather than like seeing like some kind of maniacal, or maybe like giving a window into his feeling, as in like laughing to like injustice in a way, or just a show of stress. It could be seen as kind of his deflection to deal with the deeper issues in a more constructive manner. Definitely. The reason they have that rule is to protect people who do not understand sentences more than 5 words long. Hello, Peter. I'm glad you have joined us today. And it's not actually a rule on Twitch. It's something that like I enforce. It's my rule. So yeah, it's not about me not understanding longer paragraphs, but it also like gives a different flow when people would write long paragraphs. So there's like a reasonable length, and I don't mind if you write out a paragraph that's longer. Like once it's like 2 paragraphs, then it's a bit too much and kind of stops me in my tracks. So that's why I have that rule over there. But yeah, moving away from the short psychological study tangent, or a relevant tangent, I would argue, into more like deeper into his thoughts, rather than him like being depressed or kind of like mentally somewhat deranged. We see him daydreaming once when he was watching the live show of Murray that he will eventually go to towards the end of the movie. And we see him imagine like that he's there in the audience, and that he's like stands up because Murray like points at him or whatever, and everybody's like clapping when he says something like my mom's told me that I was put on this world to make people laugh and smile, and everybody's clapping. And then Murray like brings him down onto the stage, and then rather than like imagining him kind of having kind of like gaining kind of fame and people be going crazy or anything, he rather like imagines Murray kind of hugging him and telling him you're such a sweet boy or something like that, showing that very interestingly that he yearns for affection rather than fame, or like or becoming famous or infamous, essentially. So that I found was very interesting, because I imagine that a lot of people daydream often about becoming famous in one way or another. Many people, I would imagine, would visualize themselves on a live show, on like a late night show. That's what I meant to say. Like going out with like Stephen Colbert, and everybody's clapping, and you're like you imagine what you would be talking about or something like that. Maybe it's just me, but I believe that people like kind of do that from time to time. But usually it's more to kind of imagine what would it be like to be famous, for example. I think that's kind of like to an extent, to a reasonable extent, it's something that people do. Of course, can be obsessed with it as well. Like that's another issue. But what's interesting here is that him, rather than like yearning this fame, which would be very easy for the film to portray because he wants to be like a stand-up comedian or whatever, the film goes the extra mile to show him like imagining Murray, that's the late night host, hugging him and telling him how he's like sweet and everything, that he's really like special and stuff. And like we can see the divide. Like it's not about the fame, it's not about the applause for him as much as it is about adoration. And of course you could argue like what's the difference between fame and the affection or adoration. To an extent, like fame could, I guess, be described as like the adoration of the masses, but when it's kind of translated into cinema or writing, adoration and fame are very different feelings that to yearn for, essentially. And it's beautifully shown in this scene. So I wanted to point that out, essentially. Again, like the start of the movie and generally like the first half is a lot about him either imagining stuff or going from like some level of like highs. For example, like being able to deliver his first like stand-up, to like immediate lows such as getting fired, or people beating him, or him like finding out about his his possible father, Thomas Wayne, and being like kind of like shoot off when he tries to get to his estate to talk to him. And there's loads of these injustices that are always shown to like bring him closer and closer to the edge. The movie generally does a very good job in seeing like how he goes from a level of like somewhat like sure still like mental illness or disorder, but kind of like a stable state, to a very unstable state, built up anger, built up anguish, and built up suffering that essentially moves him further and further into the darkness. And this process is made so vividly and so realistically that I think it's like one of the reasons it's one of the reasons why this was this movie was considered so controversial, because the descent into chaos and madness is done so realistically and so empathetically that like some would say that the violence that would ensue towards the ending of the movie is somewhat like portrayed as justified, or some violence is portrayed as justified at least. But yeah, so we have a big chunk of the movie going from like kind of like high to immediate low. There are like small glimpses of happiness, like by the nice neighbor, like calling him funny, for example, only to be taken away by like dropping a gun at a kid's hospital and then getting fired, as I said. And then we move towards the first big kind of cataclysmic event in the movie and the psyche of our main protagonist, or of our protagonist, our main character. And that is the train scene where he goes like through the subway, and there are just these three like Wall Street assholes that pick on him, and he has this laughter again, this laughter episode that he can't control, and they kind of like get offended and start beating him up, and they start kicking him on the floor again, just like the kids at the beginning of the movie, which again is a little bit of a stretch at the violence, but like as I said at the beginning, this is the meaning that I think was meant behind it, why there were like people kicking him when he was on the ground, because it's a very powerful visual. But at the same time, they wanted to show the difference between the beginning of the movie and the sort of the middle of the movie, because when these three assholes were kicking him in the subway, is when he like finally kind of snapped, and he pulled out a firearm, a gun, a revolver, however you want to call it, and shot them all. He shot two of them immediately. The third managed to flee, but Joker turned around and shot him in the back as he was fleeing. And that was sort of our first glimpse into what he would become, because he still had the makeup on him from the school, the clown makeup, and like he was a little bit like shaken by him, like pretty much killing these two guys. But then he saw the other person fleeing, and he just went after him. And upon finally catching up to him and killing him, he was stressed out, he was kind of shocked, he was trembling, ran into a bathroom, and that was a phenomenal scene as well. Because that dancing in the bathroom was essentially, for that character at least, was was an event of kind of like understanding and alleviation of pressure, to an extent that I imagine many people would find problematic. So yeah, so he's dancing in the bathroom after the killings of the 3 people. And yeah, as I said, it alleviated his stress and gave him a lot of confidence. So, like, gave him actually so much confidence that he then went and slept with his neighbor that he found cute, that found him funny earlier, and became like so confident and everything like that. And what essentially the movie says at this point is that like this violence, this like killing of these 3 people was the actual answer. The violence was actually the answer, because like we see a changed man. He's now kind of like happy, he's confident, there's some sort of like darkness within him, but there's also like happiness within him as well. And that is, I think, like that is a part of why the movie is so controversial, quite honestly, because again, violence being portrayed as like the ultimate answer and the alleviation of his stress and him kind of escaping his like sorrowed state through these like acts. And even though like he was more or less defending himself from, you know, having his ass kicked, and us as an audience hate these guys because they were portrayed again like kind of cartoonishly evil, it was a little bit you know, like there wasn't very like deep like characterization of these people. It was just that they were violent, they were assholes essentially. It is rather a metaphor, isn't it? Well, like you could say that everything is a metaphor, really. Like the thing is, like it's a story at the end of the day, right? So it has to work, and it does work, but it's a little far-fetched when it comes to the like him being attacked in that way. But as I said, like what it portrays, while controversial, it makes sense for the movie. It makes sense for the character. So I'm not too bothered by it. But yeah, like it's symbolic of something, as I said, because at the beginning of the movie he didn't defend himself. He just laid dying there, or lay beaten up there essentially. But then when the same thing happened in the middle of the movie, he decided to kill those people, and like answer this suffering with violence. So yes, in that case, it's like symbolic of his like struggle of being pushed to the edge, and like a different kind of reaction. But it's still, you know, it's part of the story. It's like analogical of something, but it's essentially just a portrayal of where that person went with this. What's interesting when like very interesting thing that happened after these killings was that some like poor people started supporting Joker, or you know, Anthony Fleck, essentially, you know, the clown killing. That's how it was portrayed in the media, in the movie. And he became emboldened by this, which kind of like gave a little bit of a contrast between what is the how to say that, what is the usual perhaps way of radicalization of people and shooters in real life, and what was, you know, this one in this movie. Because usually when it comes to like shooters in real life, or violent criminals in real life, their acts are often as a result of them being shunned by society, and them like essentially not handling it, or, you know, being shunned for the way they are, for example. But the society shunning, that's essentially a big ingredient in like what happens to these people. But here it seems that like more violence and like more confidence becomes the kind of catalyst for more radicalization of Joker. Because for him it's not about fueling his anger as much as it is like some kind of deranged need for affection, if you know what I mean. It's more like seeing that what he does is popular for people, or around people. And even though he says like he doesn't want to be like you know, that he isn't political or whatever, he still kind of has that feeling that that's what he wants, you know. Just like in his kind of imagination, he stood up and Murray in the late night show invited him over and hugged him and everything. Just like that, he feels that he's getting the affection now, the understanding for his work, and you know, the love of the you know, the society or the community for the killings. So that is, you know, his driving force essentially from then on, to an extent, even though it's not explored too deep. But it's just an interesting thing that I kind of noticed, that I remarked upon while seeing the movie. But yeah. By the way, any thoughts that you might have on whatever I'm saying? Like maybe I'm absolutely, you know, everything I say is gibberish or whatever. Maybe I'm completely wrong, or maybe you agree with something, disagree with something. Let me know. This is, you know, backseating is allowed here. So whatever your opinions or ideas, let me know. You're gonna make me need to go to the toilet very soon, Gautier. I'm drinking 3 different drinks. But yes, maybe I also should have explained why the people support the murders, because essentially, like if you haven't seen the movie, there's a big anti-rich fair enough. There's a big anti-rich sentiment, or anti-rich sentiment, if you will, in the city of Gotham, where this takes place, and yeah, it's also very well shown at another one of the social workers kind of visits to the social workers, where the social worker informs Arthur that they don't no longer will be able to provide him with medication because they're shutting down their program. The government is shutting down the social workers program, which is quite interesting since crime is on the rise. But you know, whatever, that's like budgeting of cities. I don't really care about that. But essentially what she says, they don't give a shit about you, Arthur, and they don't give a shit about me. The social worker tells to Arthur, and that kind of underscores the sentiment, while lots of these people that feel disenfranchised are supporting the murders of these 3 Wall Street assholes that you can see on the screen right now. Actually, that's the scene of them beating him up. I'm mostly lurking today, still at work at the moment. Absolutely no worries, completely understandable. Again, this stream might be on either you know, very good time zone or very bad time zone, depending where it is. Gautier, you're in Canada, I know, so you know, no worries. But yes, that kind of like, even though his social worker is kind of shutting down and he will no longer have access to his medication, these kind of killings and the reaction of the public give him a long spell of confidence and happiness. We see him like going on dates with the neighbor, with a neighbor that he met, and you know, hanging out with her. He's proud of his work, you know, of he does, because what he did, the killings, and he feels the support from the community for the very first time. The need to be adored, as I said, was kind of fulfilled by this. What is very good, by the way, with the movie is that it remains consistent as well. The themes of both like the gradual descent, but also like the ups and downs are, you know, kept throughout, and it is shown how it consistently like puts his character down and kind of makes him become this kind of monster that you can see on the screen now. But it's not portrayed as like how a monster is born. It's portrayed how a monster kind of like is fostered by the community and society. Because of after this long spell of happiness and kind of you know, contentment, he it is replaced again by a gradual descent, not into despair this time, but anger. He wants to confront Wayne, as I said. He finds out that his mother was hospitalized, that he was adopted, that he was abused by his mother and her former boyfriend, and he was mocked by Murray at the very late show that he adored to watch, that he adored to imagine himself being on and being adored by Murray. He daydreamed by that, and he's seen that after his mother was hospitalized. He's seen that in her room, and moments or like a couple scenes after that, he went to confront Wayne at like a beneficial concert. He told him, your mother was insane. She was hospitalized or she was put into a mental asylum, and he goes into a mental asylum. Joker does, and finds out for himself, and he kind of steals and reads the records of his mother being there, and that kind of like cements his kind of absolute anger, but it's not shown as like a maniacal anger that you maybe would have expected, but absolute darkness. So rather than descent into chaos and anger, it's kind of descent into darkness that is complemented by this maniacal laugh, and it's this like deranged kind of villainy that many people know Joker from. And now like we kind of have that story put into more of a human level, where it's actually brought so close to us that some people reject it as controversial and dangerous, even this very film that we will talk about more after that. Because there is a difference between having a Joker that you can see even in The Dark Knight, and definitely in like, I imagine, actually I can't really talk about this with authority because I haven't read them, but like comics, but like in the general popular culture, I can talk to that at least, where he's like this maniacal kind of villain, and he's like really evil, but he's laughing, so it's like a little crazy, and it's sort of otherworldly. You look at it and you look at it as a fairy tale, and there's nothing wrong with fairy tales. They have their purpose, and it's mostly kind of escapism. It's escapism rather than realism, and that is absolutely fine. Like, it has its place. But here it's taking that like fairy tale-y villainy kind of vibe and puts it into the real, into the real like grittiness of the real world, and the mental illness and violence and derangement of sort, on a level that people can like kind of understand and see in real life. And that is that is what makes this movie so powerful in both the negative and positive implications. But yes, so he discovers the mother's past. There's this very powerful scene where as he reads the records, there are these like flashback scenes of his mother being in the asylum, because as he reads the records, he knows what kind of happens, and we can see kind of the interviewer ask, or like the therapist ask the mother when she was young, like, like, you need, like, how you're feeling and everything like that, and he kind of recounts of like what's happening, because the mother is suffering from amnesia of some kind as well, probably. And he recounts how Arthur, when he was younger, was chained to a radiator, how he was beaten and abused, and throughout these like very distressing and very dark and like horrible recounts of like child abuse, of like severe child abuse, he is laughing maniacally, and the music, the dark music, is now at its most intense, and there's the violin and everything, and it's like super dark and intense, and there's this serious therapist who's recounting of what's happening, and at the same time what's the loudest is his laughter. And that's why it's so important to define the symbols like that, as well as the movie has done. Because if this exact scene was, for example, at the beginning of the movie with nothing before, I would look at it and I would say this is fucking horrible. This is disgusting. Like, why? Like, because what I would imagine at that point is like, okay, so you put some like horrible darkness and dark shit, and then you put just, you know, Joker laughing over it because Joker is laughing, because Joker likes to laugh. Like, you know, how fucked up that is. How fucked up is that? But no, I didn't. That didn't even occur to me until now, until I wanted to make that example, because the laughter was so well portrayed as the ultimate symbol of his kind of despair at the world in so many different situations, in such a, like a phenomenal level of like explaining explanation of the detail of that symbol, that it just worked perfectly in this scene, and it was like super powerful, and like I couldn't stop it. It was super gripping, and there were many scenes like that. But here I just wanted to kind of visualize for you why the symbolism that we're talking about today are so important. Because had it not been there, these symbols, they would not be able to execute such a phenomenal scene.